In my previous video, I talked about venom shame causing 3 patterns that cause binge eating. And in this video, I'm going to be giving practical tips that you can use to defeat these 3 patterns. So this is a how-to video. And what we'll be doing is building off the framework that I established in the previous video. So if you want to check out that video, you can use that link above or down below. It's just 3 minutes. It introduces the villain of, of shame. And these are the tools that shame uses, the 3 big ones: body image shame, the shame that makes you blame yourself, to try harder, to restrain, to be productive, to ignore your needs, to be dismissive of what you really need, that causes you to become depleted, that causes you to become in a state where you're easily triggered and something just sets you off over the edge, or you fall into black and white thinking where if you make a little mistake, screw it, why not? And then ultimately this just leads to a breakdown. There's too strong an emotion, you zone out, whatever, the cravings happen. And so those are the 3 patterns I established in the previous video. This video is going to be about how to actually deal with those patterns. We're just some basic tips. And finally, there's the Eating Enlightenment app. So be sure to download that if you haven't, so you can get started on bringing awareness to your eating habits. And then it really does help if you like the video, to like it. And then that really helps the algorithm do its thing and get out there. So if you do get something, if you find these tips useful, be sure to hit that like button. Really appreciate it. Oh, and lastly, leave a comment if you are interested in this idea of me developing venom shame and the weapons and the narrative behind binge eating, behind overeating, like what's going on from a story perspective. And I guess I'll be honest with you, I'm going to do this anyways because that's where my heart is at. My heart is at telling the story, the emotional story with characters about in a practical way where you can understand and take action. But I think so many times the information about binge eating is so logical, even just nutrition, right? We can get caught up in all this to do, and even this upcoming video is a little bit logical, right? Like all these tips, you've probably heard at least 50% of them. So anyways, not to bash on my own video, but I'm going to be making a video where I explore this character Venom shame more and the weapons of binge eating and try to craft this narrative. And I'm excited to see where it goes. So leave a comment if that sounds interesting to you and let me know what you think. Okay, now without further ado, let's dive in. So for body image, we have a few different tips. I will say the most important tip is, even if you feel embarrassed by your body, that you find things that you can do, whether that's learning a guitar, whether that's playing a game, online games. You got to find safe activities so that you can bring a little bit of happiness into your life. Another very good tip is to watch out for the mirrors and watch out for the scales. When people work with me, I actually ask them to put away their scale for the duration of their time working with me so that they can really focus on their food relationship. And when you put on clothes or when you're in the mirror, it's very common to just start body bashing yourself. So you got to watch out for these moments where shame can creep in. Another one is where you catch yourself checking out other people's bodies, comparing them to your own, and then feeling a wave of shame. It's very important that you can see that when you compare your body to others, it flushes you with shame, guilt, and it leads in the shame and guilt makes you want to try harder. And then you restrict, you work even harder at your job. It's the fuel for the restriction. And so it doesn't make you feel good. So it's very important you see that shape checking just makes you feel bad. And so really we're trying to bring the focus inward here. We're trying to focus inward. And so let's move on to the second pattern, dietary restraint. To counter dietary restraint, it's basically your flexible meal plan that you've probably more or less heard. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, a snack, don't let more than 5 hours go by without eating, have protein on each of these breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack. You're aiming to feel content, you're aiming to feel good after you eat, you're aiming so that your hunger doesn't come back after 1 or 2 hours. Overall, it's very important, especially with dietary restraint, is that you just pause during the day and check in. That you, like a turtle who's underwater and needs to come up for air. You need to come up for air, okay? You need to take breaks during the day, and you need to check in with your body. You need to feel what you need, to listen to what you're needing. And a very important pattern too that I always love people seeing for themselves is that if you're keeping this CBT food awareness journal, you'll see that if you binge, it's oftentimes preceded by skipping a meal or two, or underproportioning where you only had a little bit and you weren't really full or satisfied afterwards. And so seeing the pattern that when you restrain yourself, when you don't eat enough, it leads to a binge. That's money right there. That is very important you see for yourself. And then that kind of naturally gives you the intrinsic motivation to start eating more. Okay, let's go on to the third point, catching the cravings or seeing the patterns that cause the cravings. There's one very important technique in this, and that's binge analysis, a growth mindset where you learn from mistakes and you see what you can do differently next time. So when you binge, it's very important that you think about what led up to this event. Did I undereat? Did I get into a perfectionistic mindset where basically there's these cues, whether it's eating a little bit too much and feeling like a failure, stress, working all day, and then the cue is finally having a break, like after dinner, and you continue to eat after dinner. You want to look back and see what's leading up immediately beforehand. And that's kind of where the Eating Enlightenment program actually starts, believe it or not. We start with the guideline, you got to journal before you eat. And that's kind of tough sometimes because that means you got to journal before a binge. That's tough, right? But by leaning in, right? Leaning into this practice, maybe in the beginning, all you do is you scribble before you eat. I had a client one time who said, I cannot write before a binge. There's just a block that I have. I can't do it. I said, what if you scribble? What if you just break that pattern, disrupt that pattern, and just scribble? And he scribbled, and that kind of helped him get over his fear of journaling before a binge. And another really, really important mindset is that this perfectionistic voice, listen, the perfectionistic voice is going to say, oh, you journaled and you still overate, you're a failure. Like, you got to catch that. You got to have expectations that, hey, this is going to take a little bit of time and study and practice. It's like learning a new language or something like this. These, the combination of interrupting all these patterns, it's like learning a new language. And so you got to be patient with yourself. You got to give yourself some time to integrate these things and to make them, become fluent in catching the shame and feeding yourself and checking with your body and understanding what your body needs and all this stuff. That recaps the 3 patterns that are causing binge and emotional eating. It's the shame, it's the dietary restraint, and it's the urges. Be sure to download the Eating Enlightenment journaling app down below to get started on this. And namaste.